And the correction there is that I wasn't correcting Jordan. I was adding to the conversation, and that's what I'm here to do. There you go. Now, enough out of me. Okay, because I want to get right into it. Jordan, you've heard everything I've just laid out here, and
yes, I did.
And go ahead and comment, say what you'd like about it.
Well, I always have said, I try and say every time I'm on the air, I try and say that I am just an ordinary man pursuing extraordinary knowledge. I'm not the world's foremost authority on anything. Why? Because I'm smart enough over the years to know how much I don't know. And I've learned a long time ago, it's better to be humble and admit that you don't know everything going out the gate, so that any detractors who want to make a fool out of me by showing that I made a mistake are going to be very difficult to do, because I'm telling you up front, I'm not the world's foremost authority on anything. I've just been in the company of fascinating and important people all my life, and I have learned many things from them. And they got me started onto researching certain subjects I didn't even know existed. And so I totally am aware of how much I don't know, and I make mistakes like anybody else. But that doesn't mean that you get rid of 99% of what somebody has done because they make a small mistake somewhere. So I've made errors, and I will continue to make errors. Why? Because there's so much in history books that is incorrect. So many things that we believe to be true aren't true. When you really do research, you begin to find out how much you don't know and how much you didn't know. And there's so many subjects out there that are far, far bigger than we think they are. And a lot more to them than what we've been told.
Well,
and so
right.
when you get into theology, when you get into theology and religion, that's very difficult, boys, filled with minefields everywhere.
Well, right, like digging into this, and this is where this whole conversation and this correction from the listeners led me, Jordan, was to start to study the actual formation of the State of Israel, the fact that there was, and stuff I'd never seen before because I wasn't looking for it, regarding the Zionist Council that came up with the concept of, and the fact is that they chose various other lands. They were looking at possibly even settling in Alaska and Madagascar, simply to create a Jewish homeland. This is their words, right?
Yeah, their words were the first place they picked, the first place the Zionists picked to have their homeland was in Uganda, Africa.
Right.
Uganda, Africa was the first place the Zionists picked. And they went in, they didn't say to the Ugandan government, this land is ours. God gave us this land and it's ours. They just said, we'd like to have a place to live. Would you give us part of Uganda so we'll call it Israel? And the Ugandan government thought about it, and they said, no, we've decided no, it's not going to work out. Go someplace else. So, that was the very first place. Then they even picked a part of Texas. The last part of Texas, that was the last one, the last places they picked before they went into Palestine. They picked an area in Texas. And the Texas government said, no, we're not interested in having another state, another country within our country. We're not interested in that. Right. The way we're set up as a republic, and we have 48 states here. We don't need to have another country move in. It's not going to work. So, they have many different places. They kept trying to set up a homeland here, there, and everywhere. And then they finally figured it out. They went to England. They were in England, and in America the Zionists were. And they talked with the Lord Rothschild, and Lord Rothschild said yes. And so he was the Lord. They went to the Lord, and the Lord said, yes, I will give you a place to live. And so the Lord Rothschild said to go to the one place in the world that is the most docile country in the world. Go to Palestine. Those people are just farmers. Go in there and just rape them. Just go in and take everything, and tell them God sent you. That nobody's going to argue with that. If the Lord sent you, then that's that. So just go in there and take over the country, pile in with tanks and guns and machine guns, and pile over into their country and tell them the Lord sent you.
Now, for historical context here, Jordan, and this is again brand new knowledge to me. It's probably old hat to you, but the idea here though was that the Palestinians had been subjugated by the British, the Egyptians, various other peoples had basically ruled over them, and that was just the way of things. They were constantly in this sort of position. Now, simultaneously, what was developed among these councils and these groups that sought to erect this land, what I saw was this concept of ascension. They used a Hebrew word for ascension, essentially, to describe what it was to go back to the homeland, and then they had identified that this was the homeland. Then what ensued after that is an attempt to purchase, an attempt to propagandize, and just a simple flooding in of these individuals like you're describing. But all of this was done with all backed very well by propaganda, by programs to collect money in order to literally purchase the land out from under the Palestinians, etc., and also with the idea that they could be easily subjugated as they had been for centuries, it seems like.
That's
again,
right.
Including the Egyptians, the British, various others who were in the region had at one time held it as part of their holdings, if you will, in a colonial sense. So all of this coming together as sort of a perfect storm, all the way up until post-World War II, when that declaration was made by the United Nations, and they decided to split the land and create, a quote two-state solution. All of this is happening simultaneous with that meeting with Rothschild and with this now newly crafted idea that this was the biblical, legendary homeland of the ancient Jewish people. Is that all correct, what I just said?
Pretty much so, yes. But the most important factor in this whole story, the most important part of this whole story, has been missing since day one, and that is that Israel is a creation of the Masonic order, British Freemasonry. The Masonic order created Israel, period, and created it for a political reason, so that eventually there will come a day when, if the Masonic order continues to publicize the idea that the Lord is with the Jewish people, the Jews are the God's chosen people, that's all Masonic folklore, and none of it is based on factual truth, none of it. And today, as I told you before, today in Israel there are many professors and teachers, archaeologists, paleontologists, scientists, who are writing books saying that there was, in point of fact, no ancient Israel ever existed. It's a story that has no basis in fact whatsoever. There was no ancient Israel ever. It never existed. There was no King Solomon and King David and the kings and queens and all of these wonderful names of the great prophets and all these people that we see in the Old Testament and the New Testament. None of it is history. It's all made up by secret societies and fraternal orders in Europe, which seek to establish some sort of a world government based on the idea that it is God's will, and we wouldn't want to fight against the Lord. So we don't want to fight against God and His divine will. So therefore, we all need to shut up and just accept what the British Freemasonry has given us. They have given us what we call Israel, Isis, Ra, and El, Israel, the three names of the sun god in the ancient Middle East. So you need to keep in mind, Israel is a product of Freemasonry, period. It is a Masonic creation, period. And this whole idea of a reestablishment of the Temple of Solomon Right now, we're hearing a lot of information about they're going to reestablish the Temple of Solomon, but nobody is telling you who is going to reestablish. Who? Where is the money coming from? Who's going to back it up, and who's going to make it happen? All we're told, all we're given to understand is that somehow or another somebody is going to reestablish ancient Israel and reestablish the Temple of Solomon. And Solomon's temple is going to be reestablished. And then you think, by who? Who's got the money? Who's going to do that politically? Who? Then you find out the whole of the entire operation for the reestablishment of the Temple of Solomon is a Masonic order headed by the Rothschild money and the British Masonic fraternities. And it's an incredible story that's connected to 9/11, it's connected to World War coming on the earth, it's connected to all kinds of nefarious stuff going on in the world today that America is involved in, that Europe is involved in, and have no idea in the world that it's a Masonic movement.
Okay, Jordan,
period.
A live question has come in, and it occurred to me at about the same time that Joel is asking this question. So from Joel, actually I'll combine both of our thoughts here because I know what he's going after, and I want to put this to you at exactly this time. Let us assume, for the sake of argument, just for a moment, Jordan, I realize that this is wrong, what I'm about to say, but let's assume for a moment that the idea, the story, that there is a land which has been given to a certain people by God. Let's just assume that story is true for a moment. We have a serious problem here because you need to identify who those people are. Now, there have been interesting studies by people who are not necessarily, involved politically with this, regarding exactly who genetically people that mostly identify themselves as Jewish are. And the interesting thing is that Joel must have read some of the same stuff I did, because here we go. You find that you're talking about people that are European, people that are not remotely Semitic in a sense, Semitic peoples and all that kind of stuff. You find that genetically there is hardly even a marker for them to have existed in the Middle East. And Joel makes the point here that kind of a funny point, but true. This to me personally, but I'll just read it to you anyway, Jordan. Basically, because Chuck is Sicilian. I'm half Sicilian, by the way, Jordan. Because Chuck is Sicilian, that means that essentially he has more Middle Eastern blood in his bloodline likely than the average person who identifies themselves as a Jew. Now, I happen to know about the genetic makeup of Sicilians, and Joel's correct, as far as I can tell. Okay?
Yeah.
But here's the thing. You'd have to identify this chosen people. And this chosen people would have obviously come from the Middle East at some point, right, Jordan? I mean, if this indeed is the land from whence they came, right?
You would think so. That's exactly right.
So there's an interesting problem here. If they don't have the bloodline to show that is the you see where I'm going with this, right?
Of course.
So could you speak to this part of it, because Joel has kind of an interesting take on this, and it fits right along with a lot of what I was reading. The Sicilian comment I find funny, but Sicilians are literally made up of just about anything on the planet, one way or another. Let's be honest. So you have Middle Eastern blood, you have African blood, you have European blood of all sorts in the Sicilian makeup, let's say. So I understand that part of this, but what's interesting is that most people who identify themselves as Jews are not even genetically linked to the Middle East, one. Two, one other thing that I find interesting, and I also share this experience with Joel, is that most people that I find identifying themselves as Jews in America and in Canada and in other Western countries are not even religious.
No, not at all.
Okay, so go ahead. I just throw it back to you with those interesting thoughts, because I think it fits right in with what you're talking about right now.
Yeah, because I'm telling you, there is a hidden connection, very dark and very deeply hidden connection between what we call the Jewish people today and the Germanic people, the Germans. They are both connected in some occult or hidden way that is really very deep and very dark and is very interesting. So what we call the Jewish is actually Germanic or German. The Germans are connected to the Jewish ancestry, and there's a very big story here that has never been told to the people of this world by the people who dreamt all of this stuff up. It was dreamt up, I believe, during the earliest times after the change of the century, when 2000, in the year, we're saying that today is 2018. That's 2018 years into the age, the new age that we're living in today. It's been around since 2018. Well, I am totally convinced that the history of the religions of this world, Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, are so confused as to when they actually began, as opposed to when we're being told that they actually began. I am of the opinion that Christianity probably preceded Judaism. Christianity was here before Judaism because Judaism as an ancient history never existed. That's what I'm telling you. There are many authors and writers and scientists and philosophers in Israel that are writing books and giving lectures. You can go on the web and go to YouTube and just listen to the lectures of doctors and professors in Israel that are showing you step by step there was, in point of fact, no ancient Israel ever existed in this world, period. Therefore, since there was no ancient Israel, it's very difficult to go into somebody else's country and say, God gave us this land is mine, the Lord gave it to us, so you people have to get out, leave and get out. We need your home, we need your food, so we got to have a place to live, and the Lord gave us this home. In point of fact, there was no ancient ancestry, period. Israel never existed in history, period. End of sentence. So therefore, when you hear that the Jews went into Israel, into Palestine, and said, God gave us this land, well, why didn't they go there first? And if God gave them the land, why did they go to 8 different other countries trying to set up the state of Israel? Why didn't they go there first? If they're so incredibly sure that their history is correct and there was an ancient Israel and King Solomon and King David and all the ancient prophets, they all were actual historical people, and that God gave them the land and called it Palestine. Why did they go to Africa first? Why did they go to Russia next? Why did they go to Europe next? Why did they go to Germany? Why did they go to Texas? If they were so sure that God gave them the land in Palestine, why didn't they go there first? Well, now we're finding out why the Islamic people, we're now finding out why Israel or the Zionists did not go to Israel first. They went all the rest of the world trying to set up a homeland, and finally they decided, look, it's best just to go into the Middle East, because most people in the Western world don't know beans about the Middle East. We'll just go in and take the damn property, period. We'll just move in and take it. And then we will tell the world, the Lord gave us this property and it's ours. But the professors and the historians in Israel today are writing books and proving conclusively there was no ancient Israel. It was all dreamt up, most likely by the Knights Templars, most likely by the Templar Knights, which are made famous by the Indiana Jones, The Last Crusade, Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark. The Indiana Jones movies were playing on that subject of the Knights Templar Masonic Order and how they had a design to take over the entire world and give us what we call international banking and the world government, a new world order, financially backing Adolf Hitler. As I said, there's a connection between the Germans and the Jewish people. And so when you begin seeing that the God of the ancient, the God of what we call the ancient Hebrews, what we've been told was actually the planet Saturn, and today the sun is part of the Jewish religion, well, so is the sun is part of the German religion. Well, Germany is referred to today as the Holy Roman Empire, the center for the heart of the Holy Roman Empire. We are looking at a very dark, hidden story that the Knights Templars have formulated for us to believe and sold to us around the world, so that today, all over Christendom, all over the Christian Western world, we all believe that there was an ancient country called Israel, and the Lord himself was the God of over Israel. And now we're beginning to see academically it's all breaking down, and in point of fact, there was no ancient Israel, period. It's a story. The greatest story ever told. It's the greatest story ever told. That's why it's just a story. It has no basis in political or actual historical fact whatsoever. There was no ancient Israel. So why would the Zionists go in and say to Israel and say to the Palestinians, God gave us this land, when they know the whole story was dreamt up by a Masonic order out of London, out of Europe. It's a Masonic story that's been sold to the world, and since the guys who run the printing presses and who own the media, they've been lying to us for hundreds of years. They've been lying to us in our schools, in our universities. They have a story, and it's the greatest story ever told. It's just a story. And when you find out none of it is true, it's not based on fact, and we've got a serious problem today. And we've all been bought into the same old story. So I'm just saying that you need to wake up and find out that if Israel actually existed as an ancient culture, which it did not, but if it did, why would they go to Africa, to Uganda first to set up the state of Israel? Why? Why did they then go to Russia? And after Russia turned them down, why did they go to Australia? And they turned them down. Why did they go to one country after another? They kept going to about 8 different countries. All you got to do is just go follow the history of Zionism, all the different countries they went to trying to set up the state of Israel, until it finally dawned on them. Somebody told them, it was probably Rothschilds, who said, go into Palestine and take it over. We'll financially back you. We'll back you with a military machine. And it was the Rothschilds who came up with the idea for the United Nations, a one world government of which Adolf Hitler dreamed he was going to be able to be the Führer of the new world order, when in point of fact, Germany, under the Führer, wanted to set up a new world order called Nazism. And when you find out that the high priest in Israel, who officiates over the high court in Israel, is called a Nazi, N-A-S-I. Go look it up in the dictionary. Look up the word N-A-S-I, Nazi. A Nazi is a high official in the high courts of Israel. Supposedly an ancient Israel court had the high priest as a high official in the Israeli court, and today the Israeli court, the chief justice of the Israeli court today, is referred to as a Nazi, N-A-S-I, which actually means, the word Nazi means a president. And this is why we have a president in the United States. We have a president of corporations. It goes back to the word Nazi, N-A-S-I. The dictionaries will tell you there's a better spelling of N-A-S-I. It's N-A-Z-I. I don't write the dictionaries. I'm just reading them. go back and see the difference and the connections, I should say, between NASI and NAZI. And then you'll find that from the beginning, now you're just now beginning to find a real dark connection between what you call Judaism today and Israel today and the Nazi Party. There is a very definite connection between, and if you go back to the foundation of what we call Israel, goes back to sun worship in the ancient Israel, in the ancient days of those ancient times. There were people who were worshiping the sun. They're still today worshiping the sun.
Right.
The name of the God of Israel is so holy. We're told today that the name of God is so holy that you cannot use that name in public. You cannot use that name. Right. It's too holy. But there is a substitute name that you can use if you want to talk about the God of the Hebrews. There's a substitute name, and that is Tetragrammaton. The Jews will know what I'm talking about. Tetragrammaton is the name of God. It's a substitute name. That's not the real God's name. That's a substitute name that you can use. And so the word is Tetragrammaton. Tetra, which is 4, the letter 4. Then gramma, which is a letter like A, B, C, and D. Those letters are called gramma. And so Tetragrammaton is 4 letters, tetragramma, aton, A-T-O-N, aton. Aton, go look it up in the dictionary. Aton was the sun god of Egypt. The most important sun god of all of Egypt was called the Aton. This is why they always on any synagogue, you will see on the altar in a synagogue, you will always see the name of the god that's called the Tetragramma Aton. It's the 4 letters of the god of the sun in Egypt, the Aton, and it's always inside of a sunburst. Right. This is why you see the sunburst used by the Nazis, which was a swastika in a circle. The swastika, we know, goes back to the symbol for the ancient sun god of Egypt. It's a swastika is a sun symbol. The Tetragramma Aton. The Aton was the sun god, and his symbol today is a swastika and the sunrise. And so we have the Communist Party and Soviet Union used the sun god, the Aton, as their symbol for the Soviet communism was represented by the sun god Aton. And Adolf Hitler's Nazi Germany was symbolized by the Aton, the swastika. And this is why you find swastikas on the floors of Jewish synagogues in Israel today. Today in Israel, if you go to Israel, visit some of the old synagogues, and you will see in the middle of the floor on the synagogues in Israel, you will see swastikas. Why swastikas on a Jewish synagogue floor? Because it represents the Aton, the Tetragramma Aton, the symbol for the sun god of ancient Egypt.
Right.
So
now,
this whole entire story is crazy. It's all incredibly hidden from the human, hidden from all of us. We don't know. We don't read. We don't know.
Exactly. Now, as long as questions keep coming in, I will interject them into this conversation. You guys can do that in the live chat room or on my Skype list. That's fine. We do have a live chat at Ocelli.com. Another one came in as you were speaking. So, if this is all about fielding questions today, that's just fine with me. I know that you're more than happy to do so, Jordan, right?
Yeah, of course. I don't mind.
So here is the question based on when you were talking about the word Nazi and then Nazi, N-A-S-I and N-A-Z-I. They asked, first of all, it's actually 2 questions. All right. First question is, this sounds very familiar. Does this have anything to do with the term Ashkenazi, which I'm not sure if you spelled that right, but then again, I don't know anybody who spells that correctly. I'd have to look that up. But I know what you're saying, Ashkenazi, and Nazi, the whole thing. It does sound extremely familiar. Second question is, what do you think of the work of Arthur, I guess that you pronounce that Koestler, who...
Arthur Koestler, the 13th tribe. Yeah, he wrote about the 13th tribe. That's basically what I'm talking about. Arthur Koestler was persecuted and probably died because he wrote that book. I've seen articles written talking about how the fact that Arthur Koestler, when he wrote his book, The 13th Tribe, ended up assassinated. Somebody killed him for writing that book. I don't recall this whole story, but I seem to remember that Arthur Koestler was in fact killed because of writing that book. When he talked about the whole history of Judaism is not what you think it is. That was his whole thesis of the book. The whole idea of the book was called the 13th tribe, meaning that there were 12 tribes, we're told, the 12 tribes of Israel. There was no 12 tribes of Israel. They never existed. So therefore, when you hear people talking about the 12 tribes of Israel, know that what they're talking about is Knights Templar Masonic astrology, dealing with the zodiac. The zodiac is the basis for the 12 signs of the zodiac, became the 12 brothers of Joseph, the 12 apostles, the 12 signs of Israel, the 12 great prophets. Everything in the Bible, Old Testament about Israel is in 12s. Why? Because Israel is based, the whole story of Israel is based on astrology, the 12 signs of the zodiac. That's why Jesus, another reason why Jesus is said to have been born of a virgin, because one of the 12 signs of the zodiac is Virgo, the virgin. That is where we get the idea that Jesus was born of a virgin. Right. Nobody is born of a virgin. We're talking about astrology, astrological story that the Knights Templar Masonic Lodge has given to the world. They've taken from the ancient world, the ancient astrological stories, and brought them into the Western world and called it Christianity and Judaism. So that Christianity and Judaism is nothing more than a Masonic story that was dreamt up during I think probably the 6th, 7th, 8th, and 9th, 10th century A.D., so that the whole of ancient Israel, history of ancient Israel was dreamt up by a Masonic order and out of Europe under the Vatican to give the Vatican a platform from which to work and say that they were, Christianity was the outgrowth of a religion started by Jesus in Israel. There was no ancient Israel. Therefore, there was no ancient Israel. There was no ancient religion. The whole thing was dreamt up by the same people who dream up the movies for us today and tell us all these wonderful stories of Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade and the Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark and the Temple of Doom. All these ideas are all coming out of the ideas of people who work in the Western civilization and motion pictures and television and entertainment industry. There is no history to any of it, period. That's why there's a war going on. That's why the war is getting worse every day, because we have based all of our maneuvering and the world politics America has on a story that's not true. We're trying to promote a story and make it stick and make it work when there's no basis for truth in it whatsoever. There was, in fact, no ancient Israel ever existed, period. It was dreamt up in the AD, not BC. It's not a BC religion. Incredible story, and it's all there, but it's about time somebody stands up and says something publicly so people can start looking at the subject and researching it themselves. Look at the connection between the dreamt-up name of God, the tetragramma Aton, and the word Aton, A-T-O-N, you will find is the name for the God of Israel, the Aton, which is a sun god. And this is why Jesus was referred to as God's Son, the light of the world. Of course, the sun is the light of the world. The whole of Christianity and Judaism is a made-up story by the Masonic orders, I believe, out of Europe. The European Masonic orders, period. And it's an incredible story of betrayal, and we based our whole life on it. We based our life on the church, hoping that the church was representing God, and then you find out the whole idea of God goes back to sun worship. It goes back to moon worship. It goes back to astrology. That's why the 12 signs of the zodiac, the 12 stones in the bracelet of the high priest. Everything is 12. Why? Because of the 12 months of the year. The 12 tribes of Israel. There was no 12 tribes. It's the 12 signs of the zodiac. Wake up and get a life, and you will find that everything we understand in theology and religion today was given to us by a secret society known as the Freemasons of Europe. The Freemasons of Europe dreamt up all kinds of wonderful stories for us to believe. And we buy into it because we don't know any better. We don't do any research. We don't read we don't study anything. We don't read anything. We don't know anything. But the whole story of ancient Israel never existed. That's my feeling. That's based on what I have been told and talked to so many experts and authors and writers and researchers around the world. And now, as I said, it's beginning to come out now in the state of Israel that there never was an ancient Israel. The whole entire Old Testament was dreamt up by a secret society. And this is why today I have been told by so many Christians, isn't it magnificent the way the Old Testament had all of the wonderful prophecies of things to come, the Messiah who was to come, and all the great stories in the Old Testament, and they were all fulfilled in Jesus. All the ancient scriptures were fulfilled in Jesus, in the New Testament. And I say, I don't think it's that wonderful. I think the same people who wrote the Old Testament actually eventually wrote the New Testament as a fulfillment. The same people wrote both books.
Well, right. Now here's an interesting point, too, because a lot of people that tell me that they place their whole faith into Christianity will tell me that all prophecies that were, given in the Old Testament were fulfilled in the New Testament, and it's absolute proof that it is the reality. But what you're saying, essentially, and let's give it a metaphor here. It's almost like writing a movie and then writing the prequel to that movie afterwards. So you know where it's going. Like when they did the, I know the Star Wars movies.
Well, yeah, it's a Star Wars movie. They already knew about 15 different Star Wars stories that have to be told, and they got to start somewhere.
Right. Now
they start somewhere and then work backwards, right, and then work frontwards again.
Well, see, but they started with episode 4, they did 5, 6, right? So then when they went and did episode 1 again, they knew how they were going to end up around episode 3. And it was all going to link together, but those movies came out way after. Really, that's the way to look at this here, is that, well, gee, if you imagine, or you understand, I should say, that the New Testament is really the first thing written, that it's kind of easy to create the Old Testament to make the New Testament make sense, right?
Of course.
So,
of course.
And now if you can pass that off as the pre-existing documentation, then you've got a winner there, See, that's the interesting thing here, too, is that, again, it always astounds me that from the pulpits in Christian churches today, as you and I are speaking, I'm sure there's people at church, okay, in America.
Right. Oh, there's
right?
no doubt.
And they're hearing that to say anything about Israel in any way, shape, or form is literally speaking out against God. You are literally disobedient to God.
You're
because
right.
of this. And that is ingrained in the well-meaning Christian mindset. Again, I say, I have a hard time with this because it's just like this insistence that this is the reality. And again, I mean, if you're looking for your homeland in Uganda, okay, God didn't have a map. He couldn't show you where it was, you know what I mean? He created the heavens and the earth, or they created the heavens and the earth if you read your book properly. But anyway, he created the heavens and the earth, but he couldn't give you directions, is what you're telling me. Because Alaska, Texas, Russia, Uganda, this does not sound like Palestine until they finally get to Palestine. And then it was literally the United Nations, which wound up codifying the split of the land legally, basically. And the United States ever after turning a blind eye to a lot of things when it comes to political intrigue. But, you know, it's fascinating. It's all based on the foundation, the groundwork, the literal, you know, bedrock that this is all built on is the allegedly ancient story. I mean, isn't that true? Like everything we see right now, it's all based on the allegedly, this is the oldest, you know, story there is. This is the oldest truth.
That is my point. That the reason why the Knights Templars, the Masonic Lodge of Europe, the British Grand Lodge, history of the British Grand Lodge goes back to the Masons of Europe, coming up with this story about ancient Israel and giving us the Bible. The Bible actually is a copyrighted book. It's interesting to find out who owns the copyright on the Bible. Who owns the copyright? Who wrote this Bible? And where did it come from? And who put up the money to make it the most important book ever published on the earth, that everybody has a copy of it in their language? Why is it so important? It has to do with the promotion of an ancient secret society and their particular agenda that they have for the world. They were the people behind Adolf Hitler who were promoting the new world order. And then comes in America, the Bushes with their new world order. And the Vatican talking about the coming of a new earth, a new world. And the whole New World Order is an old, ancient philosophy going back into the ancient world, and it has nothing to do with any people called Israel. The whole area we call today Israel is actually Canaan, and you will find that the Canaanites had a particular language called Phoenician. And the word Phoenician, going back to the ancient Phoenician peoples of the Middle East, give us today the Phoenician language is referred to as Hebrew. In fact, there is no Hebrew language. There is a Hebrew people that speak a language that we call them Hebrews, and therefore we say that they're speaking Hebrew. It's not Hebrew. It's a Phoenician Canaanite language. And we get the word Phoenician gives us our word phony. It comes from Phoenician. Phony and the phonics. And words like that comes from Phoenician. So go back and look at the Phoenician people, and you will see that what we call Phoenicia is today referred to as Israel. Israel is the ancient land of Canaan in the Bible. You talk about all the horrible things that were going on in the land of Canaan. And that God cursed the land of Canaan and said it was a terrible place and to have nothing to do with it. That's in the Bible, the Old Testament. Well, Canaan today is called Israel. Israel is the land of Canaan today. And this is why this is when you get into the words and terms of where these words come from. And the incredible story about the Canaanite religion. The priest of Canaan, they would offer up sacrifices. Usually it was children. They would burn as a sacrifice. They would kill the children and burn their bodies on an altar. And then, according to the Canaanite religion, they said they were worshiping the sun. And the Canaanites called the sun, Baal, B-A-A-L, Baal. Baal worship was the worship of the sun in the land of Canaan. Go back and look at it. Today, we say that we know that the priests of Canaan who were worshiping Baal, B-A-A-L, Baal as the sun, they were Baal worshipers, and they would offer up human sacrifice. They would kill children and people and then burn their bodies, but they were supposed to eat part of the burned bodies. They were burning the bodies so that God could smell the flesh. He liked smelling burnt flesh. And this is what we're told in the Canaanite religion, that God says, I love the smell of your sacrifices. The sacrifices were humans, so when they're burning humans on the altar, God loved the smell of human bodies burning. And so that's where we get this idea that they were Baal worshippers, were eating the bodies of their sacrifices. And so they were from Cana, and so they were Baal worshippers from Cana, which gives us our word Cannibal, or cannibal. Cannibal comes from Cana, worshippers of worshiping Baal, Cannibal, cannibals. And this is what we call today Israel. Israel is the land of Cannibal worship, the sun god. The sun being B-A-A-L, Baal, or swastika, or tetragramma, Aton. All of this goes back to the sun worship, moon worship, Venus worship, the worship of the planet Saturn, the worship of the moon. All of these are ancient pagan religions, and nobody today gives a damn. Nobody seems to care. We just go along to get along, and whatever everybody else is doing, that's what we'll do. Everybody's going to the synagogue. Good. We'll all go to the synagogue too. Nobody seems to know when they get there where the word synagogue comes from. Everybody's going to church. Yeah, we all Christians going to church. You don't know where the word church comes from. You need to go back and get a dictionary and look at the words and what you are supposedly involving yourself in, because you're involving yourself in a dark, ancient secret. And this is why the world is not getting any better, because we are based on lies, deception. There is no such a thing as an ancient Israel. There is no Lord coming back to save us. These are all ancient stories. Jesus himself is referred to in the book of Revelation as Lucifer. You need to go back and do some homework on all the words that you're using in religion. Where did they come from? Who is financing this fiasco we call the world and the world religions, and who set up the World Council of Churches, and where did the Vatican come from, and where did the stories come from? It's an incredible story of betrayal. Nobody seems to care. Nobody seems to notice that we've all been had and lied to, and that's what's happening to the world today. Now we're having to pay for our lies. We're having to pay with wars and violence and our country being taken over, being led into wars and slavery, stupidity and ignorance. My God, what an incredible story, a betrayal of the human family. Our religions are nothing more than a political philosophies based on some old ancient pagan religions. That's who we are today. That's why America is where it is today, and that's why the end of this country looks like it's in the foreseeable future. Our country is falling apart. Why? Because we are not God's chosen people. There's nothing about us that commemorates our connection to Almighty God. We don't even know anything about God. You don't even know where the word theology comes from or what it means.
I have one other instant question that has come up. It's a little bit longer, but I want to read the whole thing to you. And this is, let's see, this is from James. And the bottom line here, okay, let's see, where is it at? Sorry, 1 second, Jordan. I gotta roll these things around while I'm talking to you, and sometimes I overdo it. And there we go. I've scrolled it back in place. All right, I have what he says. I'll just read it. I have listened to you several times on Chuck's show and also on Rents and other places, and I have noted that many times you mention a sun god, and many times the sun god has different names. Are they all exactly the same God, or is there a big difference? Okay, well, it's kind of a general, wide open question, but I think it's an important one, because there are several times where I know on this show for sure, I haven't listened to you on Rents, but I know on this show you brought up sun worship, and you've described the sun god by many different names, and the moon god has a couple of different names, and all that. But, you know, is this just a matter of cross-contamination between cultures, or is this, this is the rest of the question, is this a cross-contamination between cultures, or are they actually different deities? Okay.
I would say and answer very quickly that we're told in the Bible that God so loved the world, he gave his only begotten Son. His only begotten Son means there's only one. So anytime you confront sun worship anywhere in the world, it's talking about that one thing that comes up in the morning for all of us for thousands of years. It's called the sun, S-U-N. And the word S-U-N is often confused with S-O-N. This is why your boy, if you have offspring, you have a male offspring, he's your boy, and he is the light of your life. We say he is your sun. He lights up your life. And he will continue to carry on your name and your life, and your presence on the earth will be continued with him. He will be the one who will continue your name and your presence on the earth when you are gone, is your Son. He is the light of your life. This is why Jesus is called God's Son, the light of the world, because the Son is the light of the world. And he is your risen Savior. That's exactly what it does. Every morning on the earth, it rises. About 5:30 in the morning, it rises. So it is your risen Savior. And what do you mean risen Savior? Well, if the sun doesn't rise, we're going to die in about 3 weeks. It's going to get real cold and real chilly, and we're not going to have food to eat. We're not going to be able to live. Our energy will run out somewhere along the line, and you cannot heat the earth by nuclear power. It's not working. It's not going to work. You can't heat the earth. Only the sun gives us the energy to grow plants and grow animals and grow food. So the rising sun is a symbol for our Messiah, for the one who has come back to bring life to us. He's come back to bring life. Why? Because he went south every year and dies in December. And he's down south, and down south it's in the summer, but up here in December and January and February, it's freezing cold. So for us in the northern hemisphere, God's Son, the light of the world, has died, and for 3 days he's dead. On the sundial, you have is December 22nd, 23rd, and 24th. The sun hits the lowest point in the southern sky and does not move northward or southward. It just stays on the same degree for 3 days. So the ancient people said anything that was moving all year long and dies between 22nd, 23rd, and 24th, it doesn't move on the sundial, it must be dead. So God's Son dies for 3 days. Then on the 25th, the sun moves 1 degree northward. Therefore, anything that was dead for 3 days and is now moving is now born again. It's now come back to light. And now 3 months later, 90 degrees and 90 days later, is now crossing over, coming back to the northern hemisphere, and is crossing over the equator. So the ancient people celebrated the sun coming across the equator, and they called it the Passover. So today the Jews celebrate what we call the Passover. The sun is passing over the northern into the northern hemisphere. It's passing over the equator into the northern hemisphere, bringing our spring. Why? Because it was dead in the winter, but he is springing back to life. So we call it spring. I mean, he was a lion of the tribe of Judah in summer, and then he was falling. He was getting weaker, and he fell. So we call it fall. And then he died in December. Now he's coming back, crossing over the equator. So it's now the spring. And the spring was always associated with the constellation of the zodiac, the constellation of Virgo, the Virgin. So God's Son is born of a virgin. The entire story is an ancient astrology story of how our solar system works. The entire subject of Christianity is based on sun worship, the swastika. This is why Christianity was so big on supporting Christianity, supporting the Nazis. The Vatican supported the Nazi movement in Germany. Hitler made connections with the Vatican, and swore to support the Jesuits. The Jesuits were operating behind the scenes in Nazi Germany, and the Vatican was supporting Adolf Hitler. It's an incredible story of the connection behind the Jewish people, the supporting Adolf Hitler. It's an incredible story of the connection behind the Jewish people, the German people, the actual history of Europe, and the actual history of the world we live in. None of it is true.